The Xbox Series S has boasted the same features as the Series X, even though the console is underpowered and it cannot achieve the higher resolutions. It's supposed to be able to handle the same types of frame rates and load times, and that was one of the boasted selling points of the console, was that even though it may not put out 4K, you could still play games at 120 FPS max, and the load times would be just as fast on the Series X. Well, with that being said, I wanted to go ahead and jump into Halo Infinite and test out, can the Series S actually perform at 120 FPS? Now, to do this, I tested both Big Team Battle, I tested the Arena 4v4 Slayer, and I also tested the campaign in the open world. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at my findings. One of the latest updates to Halo Infinite has added the ability for you to show an FPS counter. That is what makes this test and video possible. We are using the in-game FPS counter. Now, playing in Big Team Battle to start things off, the game doesn't necessarily hold 120 frames the entire time. As a matter of fact, having played in Big Team Battle, it very rarely holds 120 frames. Now, playing against multiple people with many enemies on screen and explosions in vehicles, the game drops down to 90 FPS, then jumps back up into the hundreds, and then back down to the 90s. I believe the lowest I was able to capture was in 85 frames per second at one point. And this is virtually, for me, unplayable. It makes the frame rate really jittery with it constantly moving up and down. Now, the TV that I have is a 120 hertz TV, but it does not have variable refresh rate. So this was very jarring and hard to look at. In recording the footage for this video, I did end up giving myself a headache with the way that the Big Team Battle did jump up so high and then back down low. It does hit 120 frames in very small instances, being inside in a tight quarters area or just looking up at the sky or down at the ground where there's not much going on. But whenever you had to focus in on the actual game and the action or objective for the game mode, the frame rate was absolutely all over the place. I then moved on to the 4v4 Arena Slayer on a pretty small map. I had expected that it would run much better considering that this was in an indoor map and that there were a lot less players in the match itself, and that just by the nature of having a 4v4 that there would be less going on. And while it did hold 120 frames, I would say a little bit more consistently, it still dipped down into the hundreds and even into the 90s. Again, the same result as Big Team Battle because of the jitteriness of the frame rate going up and down and up and down. It was very hard to look at and made it pretty difficult playing. I was a little bit disappointed because I did expect maybe that it would run better in the smaller playlist, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it does. Now, having played Big Team Battle and having all the issues there and playing the 4v4 Arena, I did not have high hopes for the campaign mode. And the campaign mode performed, I would say, the worst. I loaded in one of the, I would say, most taxing missions, and it's an outdoor level with a lot of enemies on screen, explosions happening. I jumped in the tank to try to really see how far down I could tank the frame rate. And yeah, it can't even come close to holding 120 frames for more than a few seconds. It is, again, very jittery with the frame rate going up and down, and was definitely hard to play and hard to look at. If you don't have a VRR display with a TV or a monitor, it makes really playing Halo Infinite on 120 frames impossible. Now, my TV has an extra sharpening filter that is added on to 120 frame per second game modes, and I assume that this is to help with visuals. The visuals when the game is on 120 FPS for the Series S, the game looks awful Graphically, it looks like what I would expect Halo Infinite if it was running on a Nintendo Switch or the absolute lowest end of a PC that you could possibly imagine. Maybe even lower resolution than the actual Xbox One VCR model. It can technically run the game at 120 FPS, but it doesn't hold 120 FPS long enough to actually make it a meaningful mode to play in. If you can and have the opportunity to play this on a Series S at 120 FPS, I would just recommend that you don't. Play it at 60. It runs great at 60. It looks good at 60. And 60 is really where I feel, at least with the Series S, that Halo Infinite shines best at. But as always, I'd like to thank you for joining me here today. If you guys are new around here, consider subscribing. I upload content weekly. And if you have played this game at 120 FPS on the Series S, let me know your experience in the comments section down below.